Hi everyone, I'm starting early. Thank you for joining me.
You're going to hear the mention of a lot of names as we present our case to you. But it is so important that these names don't get lost in the shuffle because they are the reason we're here. Because on July 23rd of 2021, these three young men were murdered. Nemo Yang, Peng Lor, and Trevor Maloney. Nemo had turned 24 years old the day before he was killed. Peng Lor was also 24, and Trevor Maloney was 23 years old. You're going to hear me refer to them collectively as the boys, and I don't mean any disrespect with that title. They were actually, as I stated, young men. But they were essentially just getting started. They were just getting started with their lives when they were taken from them.
Yeah.
And the defendant, Nia Tao, is the one who did the taking. Mr. Tao and his friend, Cam Ratanasak, who Mr. Tao referred to as Black and also referred to as his brother, took Nemo, Peng, and Trevor out to the middle of nowhere, the Ramscog Quarry, in the dead of night. Quarry is located where County Highway S and County Highway M intersect north of West Salem. The boys knew they weren't going on a field trip at 2 o'clock in the morning. They knew that Mr. Tao and Mr. Ratanasak had been looking for them. They knew they had a gun. You saw that the entrance to the quarry was blocked off by a pair of swinging cattle gates. When they got there, they told the boys to get on their knees. They told them to move towards the gate. At one point, Mr. Ratanasak hit Trevor in the back of the head with a gun
Ooh,
because he was
that
mad
hurts.
that Trevor had told him a lie. Mr. Tao kicked Nemo into the chest, and they were accusing them of being disloyal. Mr. Ratanasak demanded that they empty their pockets, and then Mr. Ratanasak handed the gun to Nia Tao and told him, "You better do it before I do it." Mr. Tao took the gun, hesitated for a moment, and then said, "Fuck it." Mr. Tao shot Nemo Yang, then he shot Peng Lor, then he shot Trevor Maloney. Mr. Ratanasak and Mr. Tao took their cell phones and got back into Mr. Ratanasak's car. Mr. Ratanasak was the one driving. Mr. Tao was in the passenger seat, and they left the boys there. Mr. Ratanasak and Mr. Tao traveled north on County Road M and turned right where M goes towards the northeast. Near N7305 County Road M, the gun they used was thrown and landed on the south side of the road. You can see here, this is where M goes to the northeast, and there's a location there where the gun was located on what would have been the passenger side of the road if you're driving north. This is
Well,
what
come on,
the
please.
evidence we present to you will show. That Nia Tao is guilty of the intentional homicides of Nemo, Peng, and Trevor as a party to a crime, and that he possessed a firearm while doing so when he was prohibited from possessing a firearm, also as party to a crime. And now I want to take you through how we are going to prove this to you.
How are you going to prove it?
For starters, there was someone else at the quarry with Mr. Ratanasak and Mr. Tao in those early morning hours. They left a witness, a woman named Bridget Schlicht. At this point in Bridget's life, in July of 2021, she was living in two very different worlds. She's going to tell you some things that aren't normal, everyday topics of conversation. But at that point in her life, her home was in Vernon County. She shared equal placement of her young daughter with her ex-husband. And when she was at home, she was mom. When she didn't have placement of her daughter, she would go to La Crosse and seek out and use meth. Bridget was familiar with both Mr. Ratanasak and Mr. Tao, as well as Trevor Maloney. She got to know Peng and Nemo in the days just before their deaths.
Over drugs.
Bridget had known Trevor the longest, about 6 months. She met Mr. Tao in early June of 2021 at a house on the north side. Mr. Tao was in a little bit of distress, and Bridget's a little bit of a caretaker. Her mama bear instincts kick in sometimes. So she gave Mr. Tao a ride to Holman. For the next month and a half, she would see Mr. Tao pretty regularly when she would come to La Crosse. Sometimes she'd give him a ride or give him a place to crash if she had a place and he needed it. Mr. Tao introduced Bridget to Cam Ratanasak, but only by the name of Black. This happened about 2 weeks before the homicide. Mr. Ratanasak was from the Wausau area, but had recently started to hang around in La Crosse with Mr. Tao.
Yep.
In the time that Bridget knew all of these gentlemen, she used meth with them. In the 2 weeks leading up to the homicide, she had sex with Mr. Ratanasak.
What?
And also had a brief sexual encounter with Mr. Tao.
Mm.
In the days before the homicide, Bridget had recently gotten a new job at the Holiday Inn in Onalaska. She would be working overnights. Her vehicle was getting repaired, so she couldn't drive back and forth to Viroqua. So she stayed in a hotel room at the Baymont in Onalaska with Trevor Maloney. They were joined by Peng and Nemo and some others, including a gentleman named Michael Vang, sometimes referred to as Bam. Bridget didn't work the night of July 22nd. And Trevor had gone to Westby earlier in that day to deal with some family matters. Bridget needed to go home to Viroqua to get her birth certificate. She needed to provide it to work as identification. Nemo and Peng asked to ride along with her, with the plan that on their way back, they would pick up Trevor in Westby. They left for Vernon County at about 10 p.m. that night. And Bridget's going to tell you that about that time, she started noticing some things going on. Something with Mr. Tao and Mr. Ratanasak on one side, and the boys, but particularly Nemo, on the other side. She wasn't exactly sure what it was about, but it was clear they were mad at Nemo, something about the theft of money. She didn't know all the details. But it was clear to her that Nemo, Peng, and Trevor were trying to stay away from Mr. Ratanasak and Mr. Tao. Bridget and the boys got back into La Crosse at about 1 a.m. on July 23rd. They were headed towards the Holiday Inn so she could drop off her paperwork, the overnight supervisor. And at about this time, she starts getting phone calls from several people. One of them is from Mr. Ratanasak, asking where Peng and Nemo are. She and Trevor tell him that they don't have them and don't know where they are. And remember that, because that's the lie that gets Trevor pistol whipped later in the night. Bridget's still heading towards the Holiday Inn when she sees Mr. Ratanasak's car, a black Mercedes. And it quickly becomes clear that Mr. Ratanasak spots her as well, because he follows her to the Holiday Inn, and when she parks, he parks next to her. Bridget goes into the hotel to drop off her birth certificate. At this point, it's about 2 a.m. on the 23rd. She leaves the boys in the car, and when she comes out a few minutes later, she sees Mr. Ratanasak standing outside of the car, and he has a gun. She gets back into her car, and Mr. Tao is now in the back seat, where Nemo had been before. Nemo was in Mr. Ratanasak's car. And Bridget wasn't the only one that Mr. Tao was trying to contact in his search for Nemo. In the days leading up to the homicides, he has Facebook messages to several other people, accusing Nemo of stealing his debit card and threatening Nemo that if he won't show his face, Mr. Tao's coming for his family. And remember Michael Vang. He was with the boys the day before they were murdered, and he had known Mr. Tao and Nemo for a long time. At one point, Michael Vang even offered to pay any debt that Nemo owed. Mr. Tao was messaging Michael Vang late on the night of July 22nd into the early morning hours of the 23rd. And Mr. Vang will testify that Mr. Tao was looking for Nemo, asking where they were. And after Mr. Tao and Mr. Ratanasak made contact with the boys and Bridget in the Holiday Inn parking lot, he sent a message to Michael Vang that said, "Peng here with both." And now that they've found the boys, they've split them between the two cars. Mr. Ratanasak leaves the Holiday Inn parking lot, and Mr. Tao tells Bridget to follow him. She's following him on Highway 16 towards West Salem. She doesn't know where they're going, and Mr. Tao isn't really talking a lot. But he does have 2 phone calls in that time that they're driving. The first was with Michael Vang, or Bam. And Bridget overhears Mr. Tao tell Michael Vang, "We got them." Then there is a phone call with Mr. Ratanasak, who says he doesn't know where he's going. Remember, he's from Wausau, he doesn't know the area. So Mr. Tao tells Bridget to pass Mr. Ratanasak and take the lead. He's now directing her where to go. They get to the intersection of Highway 16 and County M, and Mr. Tao tells Bridget to turn left. As they approach the quarry, Bridget misses the turn, and Mr. Tao tells her to turn around so that she can enter the driveway. Mr. Atanasak, also unfamiliar with the area, sees her go past, he goes past. But then he backs his car in next to Bridget's. And then they all get out. At this point, we know, unfortunately, what happens next. But before it does, Bridget tries to de-escalate the situation. Mr. Atanasak threatens her and says she should go stand by her car unless she wants to join them. So she shuts up and listens to him. Mr. Atanasak hands the gun to Mr. Tao and then gets back into the driver's seat of his car. Mr. Tao then shoots Nemo, Peng, and Trevor several times each. Bridget says she estimates that she heard about 9 shots. And this is corroborated by the autopsy doctor, Dr. Ross Reichard, who will testify that Nemo Yang had 4 bullet entrance wounds, 2 in the back of his head, 1 through his hand, and a 4th in his back. Peng Lor also had 4 bullet wounds, 1 to the back of his head, 1 to his back, 1 to his neck, and 1 to his hand. Trevor Maloney had 3 bullet wounds to his person. 1 went through his arm, the 2nd to his left temple, and the 3rd to the back of his neck. And Bridget will tell you that she saw the shot that hit Trevor in the temple. When Mr. Tao and Mr. Atanasak got out of there, so did Bridget. She had just witnessed something inconceivable, something horrible. She was scared and she wasn't sure what to do. She's all by herself now. So she decided to go back to the Holiday Inn because she knew there were cameras that covered a certain area of the parking lot. Those cameras show her arriving back to the Holiday Inn at 2:53 a.m., less than an hour from the time that they left the Holiday Inn. She stays parked there until 8:04 a.m. She was trying to figure out what to do. She was thinking, she was panicking, she was afraid. And one of the reasons she was afraid, because after this happened, as she was driving away from the scene, she started receiving calls from Mr. Atanasak. She wasn't answering. And she also received a text from Mr. Atanasak that told her not to tell anyone. She tried to call him back quick, but it didn't connect. So then she called Mr. Tao. In the conversation she had with Mr. Tao, he was trying to convince her to meet them at the Motel 6 so they could collaborate a story. Bridget said no. She just witnessed 3 people get shot and she was scared for her own safety. This would be the last time that she would talk to Mr. Tao. And the final thing he said to her was, "You're a good friend, Bridget." Police were called to the quarry at about 5 a.m. the morning of July 23rd. A crime scene response team from the Wisconsin State Crime Lab also responded later that day. And you will hear testimony from forensic scientist Nick Stalkey, who will tell you about the evidence that he located and his observations of that scene. Some of the evidence collected included 10 fired cartridge cases. At about 12 p.m. that day, Bridget showed up at the police department. It was rocky territory for her. She wasn't sure what to do. She'd been using meth in July of that year, including just the day before. Been around a lot of people using meth, and she even carried some herself. She didn't particularly trust police. She had had bad interactions with them in the past. And she wasn't quite sure what she could say or what she should say or how she should say it without revealing too much about herself or her own activities. But she decided she had to go in and tell police what happened. It took a couple hours, took many hours, and several interviews. And Bridget's going to explain to you that at first she just didn't know what to do. There's no playbook for this. She didn't know where to turn. Before she came to the police department, she deleted her cell phone history with Mr. Tao and Mr. Ratanasak. Part of this was recovered when she consented to letting police examine her phone. But she was trying to distance herself. She will tell you that she was worried about what her mere presence at the scene would mean for her. But it eventually all came out. So in the hours after the homicides, Bridget goes to the police. And so what is the evidence going to show you about what Mr. Tao and Mr. Ratanasak did? At this point, agencies from all over the state are involved. Eventually, they find Mr. Ratanasak's black Mercedes dumped in a field near Green Bay. They dropped off some bags of property at a residence in Door County. Trevor and Peng's phones were given to one of Ratanasak's associates, and they were eventually dumped at a Walmart recycling center in Sturgeon Bay, Wisconsin. After 5 days of searching for them, on July 28th, Mr. Ratanasak is arrested in Stevens Point, Wisconsin. A few hours later, Nia Tao is arrested in Wausau. Mr. Tao wasn't doing well after his arrest, but he had a friend who was also in custody that he could confide in, Michael Luco. Mr. Tao and Michael Luco had known each other for 15 years. And Mr. Luco had last seen Mr. Tao on the Wednesday before the homicides. At that point, Mr. Tao was looking for Nemo and asked Mr. Luco if he had seen him. Mr. Tao also had a gun on him that day. And now they're together again, and Mr. Tao told Mr. Luco, I messed up pretty bad out there. He told him that he rode with Bridget out to the quarry, and then that he and Mr. Ratanasak told the boys to get on their knees and go towards the gate. And then he told Michael Luco, I shot them. Specified that he shot Nemo first, then Peng, and finally Trevor. And then, remember that I mentioned the firearm that had been tossed to the south of Highway M near N7305. That was one of the last pieces of the investigation to come together when a member of the community who was out alongside the road picking up traffic found it. It was April 13th of 2023, so more than a year and a half after the homicides. There's some rust on that gun, and when the La Crosse Sheriff's Department responded, the deputy examined the gun, and he ejected the magazine and observed that there were still at least 2 bullets in it. The firearm, which was a .40 caliber Glock, was sent to the Wisconsin State Crime Lab for testing along with the fired cartridges that were located on the scene and many of the projectiles that were recovered from the bodies of Nemo, Peng, and Trevor. Jessica Crawford, a firearms and tool examiner with the Wisconsin State Crime Laboratory, analyzed these items, and she will explain to you how she was able to conclude that the cartridge cases and the projectiles that were fired from the gun recovered almost 2 years after the homicides came through that gun. Ladies and gentlemen, over the course of the next several days, multiple witnesses will tell you that Mr. Tao and Mr. Ratanasak were searching for Nemo. They chased him down. Mr. Tao got into Bridget's car and directed her how to get to the quarry in the middle of the night. Mr. Tao took the gun from Mr. Ratanasak and fired it multiple times at each of the boys. He and Mr. Ratanasak then fled the scene, dumped the gun, and scattered evidence all over the state. Mr. Tao then hid in Wausau until he was apprehended. The judge gave you that party to a crime instruction, and the evidence will show that they were acting together. It will show you beyond a reasonable doubt that on July 23rd of 2021, not only did Mr. Tao, as a party to a crime, possess a firearm when he was prohibited from doing so, but also as a party to a crime, he committed the intentional homicides of Nemo Yang, Peng Lor, and Trevor Maloney. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Nelson? Can I just ask, is the jury doing okay? Okay, all right, go ahead.
Bridget Schlick had to make a choice. It was a life or death choice. She chose to protect herself. She made what you're going to hear is a safe choice. She had to pick between Dia Tao, a homeless man who she'd driven around, she was not afraid of, and he agreed. Even after all of this, she'll tell you, she's not afraid of him. She had to pick between that safe choice or Cam Ratanasak, also known as Black. I think it's actually Blackie, might be Black or Blackie. You're going to hear that he considers himself, his street name, Heartless. This is a violent man she's deathly afraid of. She's at the police station. She's sitting in this chair, talking to Mr. Leinfelder. She's been there about 4 hours. She's lied to them. She's minimized her involvement. And she's finally having to make a choice. Who's the shooter? She picks life. She picks the safe choice. She picks the man she's not afraid of. she blames the homeless man. She doesn't blame the violent man who she'll tell you hurts Vinny. She doesn't blame the violent man who put a gun to her head and threatened her. She doesn't pick the violent man who, after this all happened, sent her a text and said, "Don't talk. Don't talk or else." She doesn't pick that. And I think over the course of this week, you may come to, we'll all come to, absolutely understand that choice that she made. I think the evidence is going to make clear that that's the rational choice. The choice a human being makes to save themselves, to protect themselves. And while she's up there in that chair testifying, you may understand it, you may appreciate it, but that doesn't mean you need to believe it. That's what this comes down to. Is that believable? The judges told you a couple of jury instructions that I just want to get you so you can start thinking about it, so you can put things into the context as you listen to it. The judges told you that it will be your duty to scrutinize the testimony. The judges told you that you will need to consider whether or not there is a reasonable doubt. The judges told you that a reasonable doubt is a doubt for which a reason can be given. So let me tell you about what the evidence is going to be and the reasons that you can consider. The reasons of doubt. And just to make sure that we're clear as I go into this. The judges told you, and we'll get to see it again, that you can reconcile the evidence on any reasonable hypotheses consistent with Mia's innocence. You must do so and find no not guilty. So I want to tell you what our reasonable hypotheses is, because this is what happens. Cam Ratnasak, Blackie, heartless, the man who Bridget Schlitt is deathly afraid of, a violent man who's threatening people with a gun, who's angry, who's tweaking out on meth, and executes 3 people up at the floor. That's what happened. That's what the evidence is. At some point, like I said, Bridget Schlitt's going to be up in that chair. Before she was in this chair here in a couple of days, she'd been in that chair before and told the story under oath. Before she told that story under oath in 2023, she was in this chair talking to that man in 2021. But before she got in this chair, she was living a life out there, out into the world. And to understand why she said what she said in this chair, why she said what she said in that chair in 23, why she's going to stick to that story, I'm guessing, in 2024. You need to go back in time and understand who she was back then, what she did back then, what was her life like. So let me tell you a little bit from her, what I think is her perspective. She's a single mother who's living, as we heard, perhaps a dual life. A life that involves use of methamphetamine when she comes to the club. She'll tell you that she's a meth addict. She'll tell you in those 2 weeks before she gets into that chair after she witnessed, sweating every day. She'll tell you how she got to know him. Who's Cam Ratnasek, right? Before I talk, let's just talk about who is Cam Ratnasek. This person Blackie, this person who's called Heartless, right? Person that the state is going to call as a witness. He'll come here from prison. We don't know what he's going to say. We don't know that because I think everybody's going to agree. Everybody in this courtroom is going to agree. Everybody at that table is going to agree. He's a liar. So he's not trustworthy. He's not credible. He's not to be believed. He coincidentally said something that's echoed by Bridget. We'll get to that. But who is that man? Here's what Bridget says she knows. So from her perspective, when she's in that chair, what does she know when she's out on the street? She knows he's a man that just recently got out of prison. He's a man that's new to this area, that's from a different area, and he's coming to hear the lacrosse. She knows that he's a violent man. She'll tell you what she told the police: don't cross Blackie. He'll hurt you. She'll tell you, don't lie to Blackie. He'll hurt you. She'll tell you, he puts his hands on women. He'll hurt you. That's who Blackie is. When she shows up and she sits in this seat and talks to that man, you can't see it because it's covered up in makeup. She's got a black eye. Violence has been done to her. Blackie, she'll tell you, is an alpha male. First, I thought of him as a leader. You know what? He's not a leader. That's a word that I think we aspire people to see. He's not a leader. He's a bully. He's an alpha male that wants to dominate everyone, everything. He's come to a new place, a new community, and he's set to dominate. So, how do we get there? We know out there, how do we get to that chair? You know, out into the world, he's somebody that was looking for me. He's letting me. If you act, when Bridget comes up and testifies, and I believe there's another prisoner that's going to testify as well, Michael Bennett, they will talk about this debt that Nemo had to Cam. Bridget's going to say that Nemo owes Blackie. Michael Vang is going to say that Nemo owes Blackie. Blackie's going to tell you, if he tells you what he said before, he's angry and he's pissed. His word, he's angry and he's pissed at Nemo Yang. Somebody who took his money. She's going to tell you that she saw him in the parking lot at the motel, at the hotel, Holiday Inn Hotel. Here's what we know happened at that hotel, right? Bridget Schlick pulls up into a car. In the car, she's driving, and she has 3 boys. Okay? In another car, we have the alpha male, Blackie, who's driving. And his passenger is me. They pull up. Blackie gets out of the car, pulls out his gun, points it at me. What you'll hear from Bridget is she'll say, she saw that. And then she strolls into the hotel, and talks to people in the woods. You're gonna see her on that video. You're gonna get a chance to see her after she makes observations of Blackie putting a gun to another man's head. You'll see her calmly walk into the hotel, calmly speak with her coworkers, and then walk back out. She walks back out, she'll say that Cameron Blackie puts a gun to her head, points it at her and says, follow me. At this point now, Nia is in Nemo rescue shot. Gunpoint of Blackie, Nemo is forced to get into Blackie's car, and the two then drive. Bridget's driving a car, Blackie's driving a car. And they're taking the 4 passengers, so there's 6 of them, to go up to this quarry. We know at the quarry, Blackie gets out of the car and immediately pistol whips Trevor Malone. He's got the gun. It's his gun. He's doing violence with the gun. He's doing violence with the gun to a man who crossed him and lied to him, and that's why he pistol whips. There's no they. It's Blackie. Blackie orders these 3 young men to get on their knees, empty their pockets, and to crawl to a particular place. He is the ultimate alpha, evil man. Bridget's a witness to this. Nia's a witness to this. What Bridget will say is she thought there was going to be, which she'll say is a beatdown. Maybe that's why she was not scared when she saw the gun come out. Maybe that's why she looked the way she did when she walked into the hotel. Because she could not imagine a world in which this execution takes place. She thinks there's going to be only a beatdown. There's going to be no evidence that there was a plan, no evidence that anybody had talked about this, other than Cam. Cam gets there, he threatens Bridget, points the gun at her head, right? Because at this point he knows Trevor lied, Trevor got pistol whipped, Bridget had lied. Get to that. Bridget had lied to him. She shows up at the police with a black eye. Bridget says, points the gun at her and says, do what I say, or it'll be you. Then, the shooting occurs. And that's, I think, ultimately what you're going to need to decide. It's in this little box here, the shooting. Okay? Because I think we have uncontroverted evidence about Blackie being the alpha male, violent leader. He's got the gun, he's got the motive, he's got everything. He's in charge, he's driving people. And then we have this moment in time where 2 of the state's witnesses are going to say, everything changed. And then we come to after that moment in time. It's back to Blackie threatening people, Blackie getting rid of evidence, Blackie creating a world in which other people are blamed. During that time that Bridget's out on the street, on the 20th and the 21st, this occurs at about 2 a.m. on July 23rd of 2021. Okay? So a couple of days before that, she's on the phone on the 20th and the 21st with Blackie. The phone records, you'll see them, they speak, they communicate, they're talking, speak for a couple of hours on each day. Sometimes when she's at work, sometimes when she's not. There may also be texts, I'll get to that, where you won't get the opportunity to see any of those text communications. Because Bridget, the choice to protect herself, leaves them. On the 20th and 21st, she's communicating with this man, she's talking to him, and she has sex. She's clearly connected to Cam Rattenson 48 hours before the execution. She has a phone, and in her phone, she lists him as a contact. So London Bridge is falling down. Like that, like that. I don't know if it makes sense, but it's London Bridge is falling down. And London Bridge is falling down isn't just a contact in her phone, it's her emergency contact. So we're gonna get to ask her about this relationship and how it escalated over those 2 weeks to get to be that she's now afraid of him and sleeping with him, and he's somebody that's her emergency contact. That all happens just before we get to the 23rd. We see what, as I told you, we talked about what happens on the 23rd leading up to the 4th. And then you have this window of time where you're going to need to ask, who's the shooter? Who's the shooter? Is there reason to doubt that it's Mia? Does it make more sense that it's Black? That's the first question you're going to need to ask. Here's what happens after that moment in time. Blackie picks up the phone and he starts calling Bridget. Right? The phone records are clear. Blackie's got a phone, he's trying to call Bridget. And Bridget doesn't answer the phone. Makes sense. I would imagine you're thinking, that makes sense. If that person just saw somebody execute 3 men, is she gonna pick up that phone from that person? She says she doesn't pick up the phone. She says what she receives is a text message after she doesn't pick up the phone from Blackie, in which Blackie sends her a text that says, don't talk. The only reason we know about that is her words. We don't know exactly what that text said. She deleted that text. After she receives that text from, who I submit to you, the shooter that says, don't talk, she picks up her phone. She then calls her good friend, Mia Tao. She calls the person who's in the same boat she is, who's just witnessed this horrific act as a bystander. She calls and she speaks with him for 9 minutes. So, how does she get from there, the quarry, to this chair? Already when she's on the phone, she, like any human being, is thinking of what is she going to do. She gets to that chair, and beforehand she says she wants to protect herself. When she eventually gets to that chair, she'll tell you. She's motivated, she has a reason to protect herself. That's what she's been doing, that's what any human being does. And so the first thing she does is she drives to the Holiday Inn, and parks in the parking lot where there's a camera that records her. And you won't have to watch all 4 hours where she sits in her car in the parking lot and contemplates life or death or sleeps or is overwhelmed. She sits there for that 4 hours. That's the first thing that she does to protect herself. After some moment in time, she eventually leaves from there about 8 a.m. She gets to the police station about 12. In those 4 hours, she does other things to protect herself. She'll tell you that she had 2 8-balls of meth. She had these 8 balls of meth that she'd gotten from one of the young men that was at the court. She'd gotten these 2 8-balls of meth. And, there's a lot of names. Michael Vang, another prisoner that you're going to hear from. We have the 3 young men, they're connected to Michael Vang. Michael Vang had talked to Bridget Schlitz about get those 2 8-balls of meth. She's doing that work for another prisoner to get those 2 8-balls. When she's sitting in that car in the parking lot, and the video's watching her, before she goes to the police station, she goes and gets rid of those 2 8-balls of meth. She'll tell you she does that to protect herself, and she does it to save it for later. So what she doesn't do is, she doesn't take the meth and throw it down the toilet. She doesn't take the meth and get rid of it. She doesn't take the meth to the police. She takes the meth to a friend's house and puts it there for safekeeping. And what she'll tell you, if she tells you what she told us before back in 2023, what she'll tell you is the reason when she went there, to, I believe it's a Tim Marks, when she goes there, she tells Tim Marks what happened. She tells him what she saw. She tells him about this box that we're trying to figure out what happened. What you won't hear is Tim Marks here, come here and corroborate it. But she told him the same thing that she's going to tell you. He's not going to be here to corroborate her. After she gets rid of the meth, she then goes to the police station. She's there, she's in that chair, and she's in that chair for 11 hours. Right? There's times when she's sleeping in that chair, she comes back a couple of days later. But in those first 3.5 hours, we're going to get into some of the details because it's important for you to know whether there's reasons to doubt what she said there. You need to know what she said here. And when she was there, she immediately minimized her involvement. She says, I was there, they put a gun to my head, I left, I don't know what happened, I found out about it on Facebook. She says she doesn't know who the two people are. She minimizes her involvement. She doesn't tell them about deleting texts. She doesn't tell them about the mess. She doesn't tell them about having sex with Blackie. And slowly, she sits there, maybe starts contemplating things. She starts to add little bits. And the story's starting to come out, but they're having to pull it out. They're really having to pull it out of her. She's reluctant to talk about it. It might be the trauma. But it also is undoubtedly that she's protecting herself. And about 4 hours into it, she's asked about that. She then says, well, it was Blackie, it was Mia Tao. Asked to describe Mia Tao, she says, he's a short, bald lady. Blackie is a violent man who shouldn't cross the first street. She makes a safe choice to protect herself. She's deathly afraid. And as she'll tell you, she's afraid that she's going to be in trouble for being an accessory to murder. Because as we'll come to learn, she's somebody who drove to the quarry. She's somebody that's connected to Blackie in the most intimate way human beings connect with each other. She's worried not only about what Blackie might do to her, she's worried about the consequences with the police based upon her involvement. She'll tell you that her motive was to protect herself. Now, I'm going to fast forward in time when she's in that chair to a couple of days later, a week later, somewhere in there, the end of July. And Mr. Leinfelder, the police, they have Cam Rathsack, also known as Harkless, also known as Buck. They have him. He's been arrested. He comes and he sits in this chair, right? He sits in this chair and he talks to the police. And again, to evaluate what he says now and evaluate what he said in 2023, you need to know not only who the man is, but what he said back in 2021. Because the judge will tell you, do you have reasons to doubt? And it's your job to scrutinize his testimony. Here's what he'll tell you his motivations were. He says it right on a recording. He says to the police, what's going to keep me out of prison? They say, tell me the story, and his version is, what's going to keep me out of prison? Almost immediately he asks for immunity.
That is, he wants some sort of protection. He wants a deal. He wants something in exchange. This is transactional for him. This is an alpha male who out on the street uses force, but now in this seat, he thinks he can use his head and outsmart the state, outsmart the investigator. They tell him when he's wanting to seek immunity, how do we know that you're worthy? That's the word they use, worthy. Worthiness. They tell him, you need to prove to us you're not a cold-blooded killer. And when he's there in response to that, and he's sitting in that chair talking to Mr. Leinfelder, he's got to decide what he's going to say. What we know he says is this: I'm afraid to tell you. He says, I'm afraid to go back to prison. Mr. Leinfelder tells him, well, just tell us your story. To which Blackie says, but it doesn't help me. Mr. Leinfelder isn't getting much progress in getting Blackie to talk about his involvement in that shooting, in that execution. But he knows that he has a bit of information, and that information is Bridget. So he talks about Bridget, and he says, he spoke with Bridget. Now remember, there were 6 people, right? There was 4 in this car, 2 in this car to start with, okay? Bridget and the 3 boys, Cam and Zach Blackie, and Mia Town. 2 of them switch, right? So all of a sudden they come into there, but at the end of the day, there's still 6 people that go there. 3 of them are executed by a cold-blooded killer. We know that. 3 wounded before. One of them is the cold-blooded killer. And 2 of them are either party to the crime or they're bystanders. Cam knows this. Cam's sitting in that chair, and Cam's statement to the police is, I'm afraid of the truth. They tell him, well, we talked to Bridget. And one of the things you might ask yourself is, when he hears that they talked to Bridget, does he say, thank God, you spoke with Bridget, you'll know the truth? Does he say, well, Bridget will tell you, I didn't shoot you? Does he show any signs of relief whatsoever to say, this is where I'm going to avoid prison? No, he does not. He says he's afraid, essentially, of what Bridget's going to say. He says, it's a lose-lose situation for me. I'm damned if I do, damned if I don't. Damned if he does tell the truth. Damned if he doesn't, because you'll have Bridget's version. Now remember, when he's in this chair talking to Leinfelder, he doesn't know what Bridget says. He knows what the truth is. He knows his role in that truth. He doesn't know what Bridget says. He doesn't know at that time that he has the good fortune of an evil man who had created an environment in which women recant against him. You're going to hear from him that this is somebody that has done violence to women in the past. You're going to hear from him that, and from Bridget, knowledge about women recant. He does bad things to women. Women won't talk to the police. Women change their story to the police. Whether it's Stacy in Wausau, whether it's Sarah Horton south of here, or whether it's Virginia Creel in Door County. He's created an environment in which he can manipulate people, especially women. But even he in that chair doesn't think of his good fortune. He's worried about what Bridget says. So, at the end, he tells a story that is essentially what I had told you. He had the gun, he had the motive, he had the reason, he did the violence, he threatened people with a gun, and then his version is, as soon as they got up to the quarry, he does all of these bad things. He points the gun at people, he puts them on their knees, he walks them to the space where they get executed. He has the gun in his hand. And the story that he's going to try to sell to you, the story that he used to dupe the police, the story that he's going to tell you is, I just put the gun on the hood of my car, and I was worried my Bluetooth, my phone wasn't connected to my car. So I just got back into my car, and I just sat there, was trying to connect my phone to my car. And then, I don't know what happened. Mia got into the car, and then we drove off. That's what the story he told to the police. That's the story he said in the 23rd, or in 2023. That's the story he's going to try to sell to you. That when this event here that is unknown happened, he just put the gun down, walked away. This alpha, evil, violent man. Of course, again, it's our reasonable hypothesis that Blackie, who is high on meth, tweaking, he shoots them because they lied to him, because they crossed him, because they stole from him, because he wanted to dominate. Now, I'm going to come back to you probably next week where I can talk more about the law, unite your both sides, tell you the reasons why we think you should vote in a particular way. The things to think about between now and then are what the judge is going to tell you with the law, right? We talked about this in jury instruction. You need to apply the law. And so the judge has told you about party to the crime. The theories under which or anybody could be guilty of that, that they directly committed it. Who's the shooter? What happened in this box that we're talking about? Who did that? Alternate theory is that a person aids and abets the shooter. They help the shooter. The alternate theory number 3, that person was acting in a conspiracy. Now the state is going to call the 2 witnesses, right? There's 6 people at the scene, one's a cold-blooded killer, and 2 people are witnesses. They're going to call people that they say witnessed this, and they're going to call Mia Tao, the quiet homeless man that cold-blooded killer. They're going to say Bridget Schlick and Cam Ratensack say it's him. It has to be him. That's their story about who's the shooter. Now, in a week, they might come up here and say, well, we don't know who the shooter is. You might have reasons to doubt Bridget Schlick. You might have reasons to doubt Cam Ratensack. If it's all submitted to you, there will be ample reasons to doubt their shooter. And then you might see them switch gears. Say, okay, well, even if he's not the shooter, he helped in some other way. And so as we're going through the trial, I want you to listen for certain things if you could. You can listen for anything, right? You're going to find out what you want to hear. But is there going to be any evidence of a plan? All right? Will there be any evidence of a plan? Because what Bridget Schlick will tell you, from that day all the way up until when she comes here that day, she thought there was going to be a beatdown. That's what she thought. And that is why Mr. Leinfelder said, well, that makes you a bystander. That's what the police told you. If you didn't know that there was a plan, if you were just there because you're witnessing, you're a bystander. As the judge will tell you, a bystander is not guilty. There's going to be zero evidence that there's a plan from anybody that's going to talk about this, other than a plan to Cam wanted to beat these guys up. That's what they thought. neither Schlick nor Mr. Vang or Blackie, none of them are going to say that there was a plan to execute. Now, the reason that's important is what we talked about beforehand. What happened if Bridget Schlick is a bystander, because even though she helped him by driving people there, if she lacked knowledge of the execution that he did, that Cam Ratnasak did, she's not a party to that crime. She knows that, and when she sits in that chair, she'll tell you she knows that. She'll tell you she's worried still about being an accessory to murder, and that's what motivates her testimony. So what you'll need to hear is what makes Mr. Tao, whether it's gender or his race, what makes Mr. Tao different from Bridget Schlick as a witness to this evil act that this evil man did when he was high on meth and in his. One other thing that you're going to learn about from Mr. Schlick that others haven't got to hear in the past is that, or excuse me, from Mr. Ratnasak, Blackie. When Blackie was in jail, after he gets done talking to the police, they put him in the La Crosse County jail. And when he's in the La Crosse County jail, he's with somebody called, it's Michael Luca. L-E-W-K-A-O. Might be mispronouncing it. Luca. You're going to hear from that prisoner, right? The person who was a prisoner. He's going to come in here and say, I was in a jail cell with Cam Ratnasak after this homicide. You're going to hear that he goes to mental health professionals and say, I'm with the guy who did the shooting. And then those health professionals tell that to Mr. Leinfelder. Mr. Leinfelder goes to ask him about it. You'll hear about what Mr. Leinfelder says, which might give you reasons to think Mr. Leinfelder was skeptical of what Mr. Lucas said. So what Mr. Lucas says is, I'm in a cell with Cam Ratnasak, but I'm talking to Mia Tao across the hall, across another space. And when he's talking to Mia Tao across it, he says he hears Mia Tao say, they did it. They're going to bring forward a witness who's going to say he was in with Cam Ratnasak. It's not Cam Ratnasak who told me. It's not Blackie who gave them information about what happened. That's not how Mr. Lucas got the knowledge. It's not from watching television. It's not from reading the criminal complaint. They're going to pitch to you, they're going to sell to you that this man in a jail cell is going to tell you, Mia yelled across the hall, yelled across something else to this other person and said, I did. And the only person you're going to hear from the jail about that is Cam Ratnasak's bunkmate, roommate, cellmate. I don't know if they're actually in the same cell, but they're in a pod together. That's what they're going to bring to you. Because Blackie, the alpha male, he dominates. He wants to continue to dominate. The one good thing that you will learn at the end of this is Blackie was sitting in there. Since the last time Blackie got into that chair and testified, after he tried to dupe and manipulate others, since that time, he's come into this courtroom to that judge, and he said he's guilty. He said in this courtroom to that judge, he's guilty. I don't know what he's going to say now to you. I don't know. But I know he's in prison for a long time. And even though we might not need to be afraid of that evil man, Bridget still is. Bridget still needs to protect herself. Because when Bridget made those statements in that chair to Mr. Leinfelder, And Bridget made statements under oath to others in this courtroom. She committed to a story. And if she changes that story now, Bridget knows she's in trouble. Over the next week, you're going to hear all kinds of evidence about this evil man who does violent things. And you're going to have reasons to doubt the story that the two people who were sitting in that chair, who were connected, who had reasons to lie, that they tried to sell to protect themselves. And in the end, the reasons to doubt are going to require you to vote not guilty. Thank you.
Good night, guys. See you later. See you tomorrow for day 2 of this trial.
Stuffed up.